So we should be streaming. We should be live right now. And OneSpecies, right off the bat. Let's talk about who you are, because I billed you on Twitter as one of Kraut and T's infamous academics, but you corrected me on that and you said that you weren't really an academic. So I'll give you my recollection of your involvement in the Kraut and T versus Jean-Francois internet battle, whatever you want to call it, and then you correct me wherever I go wrong. So as I recall, you were the guy whose video was hosted on Kraut's channel, sort of debunking one of JF's videos shortly before, like maybe even on the same day that Kraut took his channel down. Is that right?
Yeah, but that's already days in the story, or weeks, because I already had made a video without knowing Kraut. I mean, without talking to him. I already had made a video about the JF and Kraut dispute earlier than that. And that's what got me in contact with Kraut. But at that point, his server got shut down like 4 or 5 days later. So I didn't even participate in any of the research calls, or I didn't have time to even understand what part of the process of the episode was going on. But afterwards, he just mirrored my video because he thought it would be a good idea.
Now, did Kraut get in touch with you, or did you get in touch with him?
Well, I think I threw the link of that video I had made in his public server because I noticed he had one. I wasn't very Discord savvy at the point. I wasn't using Discord. It's just that I noticed he had an account. And I thought, you know, this one is addressed to Kraut and JF, so I might as well throw it on one guy's Twitter and the other guy's Discord.
Okay, so this was days. We're talking about the infamous Discord Dare server that was obviously featured heavily in the video series by Jim, by Mr. Medicare.
No, their server is just a public server for mostly Kraut fans and or, you know, audience and alt-right people who go there to upset things and have fun. It's still public. It's still up. That's not the notorious server Jim talked about.
Oh, okay. All right, that's a silly
I just dropped the link there, and then either somebody found it from there or somewhere from Twitter, and somehow I got messaged to join them.
Okay. Now, in his intro to your video, Kraut did bill you as an academic. Is that accurate? Are you an academic, or what's your background?
No, I'm not. I don't remember the intro, to be frank, because I was already busy doing stuff. I didn't watch the second version. I thought it was a straight mirror. I'm not an academic, no. My work has to do mainly with, you know, working in front of the computer or something. But I have an interest and a curiosity for years around biology, and I happen to have read a lot of things and understand quite a few things. And honestly, most of racialist arguments are not that highbrow or that deep into the science. So, you know, a lot of laymen can cover a lot of these topics as well.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly fair to be an autodidact. Certainly, I would not begrudge you your say or your participation in this sort of ongoing conversation that society is having right now about race, because you don't have a specific, you know, academic credential. I'm not, you know, that's not what I was trying to get at. I was more just curious.
No, I know. Just clarifying things.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, what's your contention? You know, race is an interesting topic. It's a topic that I know, you know, another place that I've seen you and what sort of kept me on kept you on my radar was that I saw you a lot in the like Twitter, you know, replies to Jim and to JF. What's your contention? What are they getting wrong? What's sort of the big thing that guys like Jim and JF are missing?
Well, first of all, I appreciate the question. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with your question. It's just that it's already a way to approach the topic that begs the question. Like, we'd better build a case from the ground up. What is it that they're saying, and what is there to see in that? Because otherwise, you know, what is wrong with it? That could be a very, you know, a very disorienting conversation, because there are a lot of things wrong with it. But the problem is not that. It's what's their actual statement or position, and how can we know if it's true or not? I think that's a better approach.
Okay, why don't we do that then? So let's start with, what do you think is what is their position?
Well, of course, it varies a bit from person to person, but let's just stick to something that would do for most of the people involved. So basically, they're saying that there is a thing, there is diversity between humans, and specifically human groups. So far, so good. There is some diversity between human groups, indeed. And they take that to support, as supporting evidence for a certain taxonomical proposal that it's quite vague, but let's not get hung up on that. A proposal of taxonomy, basically. They say that this is enough evidence to present a certain grouping of people according to races. Okay, is that fair enough? Or
yeah, absolutely. So they say, you know, this is what I'm getting from you, is that the fundamental worldview of a guy like Kraut, or sorry, not a guy like Kraut, a guy like JF or a guy like Jim, is obviously there is genetic variation that exists, right?
Yeah.
So then the question is, can we use that genetic variation to create like a taxonomical scheme for the human race? And they say, sure, why not? And do you say no?
First of all, I can say my opinion, but what's more...
Okay, yeah, you know, you're right. Let's keep going over what they think. Yeah, good call.
Yeah. But the thing is that actual taxonomists do not come up with such a classification. Now, to make things clear, a racial classification doesn't have to be super bulletproof or super defined. Or my problem with it, it's not that it's vague, but because, you know, things like ethnicity are vague, but they're still useful because they convey information. My problem is that no actual taxonomist has gone into the trouble of actually putting a certain taxonomy proposal to the test of peer review. So that hasn't happened. And secondly, all the people who are very strong about racialist concepts, they do not take into account the actual debate in science right now about these things, which is very vivid and very vibrant. And a lot of issues are open. Like, if anything, the best scientific support they could have for their theory is that a few issues about human biodiversity are still being discussed in the scientific community. The way they present it, it's as if, you know, there is solid science behind race and people choose to ignore it because political correctness. Which, you know, it might apply to some BuzzFeed types or something, in the sense that they wholly reject any influence biology might have on people at some point. But that's not the case with normal people who just discard race realism or do not accept race realism. For most people, human biodiversity is a thing. It's just that officially there's no suggested taxonomy by any, you know, specified scientist to do that. And unofficially, they do not present the debate in science honestly. They present it as if, you know, science is settled. We know it since, you know, 50 years ago, whatever. But the lefties don't want to accept it, which is very disingenuous. And in fact, a very neutral video about this was made by Gabriel Lucas some time ago, could be a year now, which is a 1-hour video. It presents, you know, nearly every scientific paper that is relevant or theory that is relevant to the topic. And it clearly shows that there is no settled science for or against any specific taxonomy among humans or any specific racialist understanding. So it's still ongoing. So that's the first gist.
I'm very intrigued by a phrase that you've used a couple times now, where you say actual taxonomist at one point, and another point you said verified taxonomist. What do you mean by that?
Listen, what do I mean? It's, look, I can take a look into scientific papers, okay, but I cannot, and I surely can come up with my own interpretations, and I can surely drift off in my interpretations of the papers. But that doesn't define scientific literature or scientific know-how or scientific statements. It's my opinion. So people can extrapolate things from papers, from research papers, but unless they put their extrapolation back into the peer review system, it's basically worthless. It's opinion or, you know, observation. It's not something that has scientific validity, because I see a lot of people do this kind of thinking. There's some research paper out there, so that's evidence, and then I interpret it somehow, and then somehow that makes my interpretation valid. So what I mean by a certified or something taxonomist is that if a taxonomist thought that there is actual taxonomical value in some scheme of racial groups, they would put it on the paper, they would put the evidence on the paper, and they would hand it in for peer review. They wouldn't make a YouTube video suggesting that, you know, these 20 studies that are 40 years apart mean races exist. They wouldn't do it like that. So I'm only basically applying the same standard we have for cardiologists, nutritionists, you know, orthopedics, just the same standard.
So then here's a question I have for you. Jean-Francois Gariepy is pretty upfront about his criticism of the peer review system. He says, you know, I'm going to sort of wear my partisanship or my perspective on my sleeve here and say my sympathies tend to be more towards the guys that you're criticizing, and I do listen to their material. And I know that JF is really upfront about eschewing the peer review system. He's called it worthless. Ryan Falk, Alternative Hypothesis, refers to himself as an autodidact. He's very upfront about the idea, or about the fact that he's not, you know, he doesn't have a doctorate. He's not a researcher at some big university. He's a guy doing research in his private time, you know, for his own little project. Because these guys are so transparent about sort of where they exist in the constellation of science, what is your role? I mean, what's the point of you coming along and saying, well, hey, wait a second, guys, before you know, hear what they have to say, they're not verified taxonomists, or they're not real taxonomists, when they say those things themselves?
Well, first of all, everyone's enemy is our own delusions. Like, you can lie to me, and that could be bad, but if I lie to myself, I carry that shit all over the place with me. So I'm doing more harm when I'm lying to myself. So the thing is, I'm just reminding people the basic stuff that's necessary to not delude yourself.
Well, okay, but wait a second. Who's lying? Where's the lie?
Give me a second. Yeah, the lie is in that, first of all, look, I'll go into detail later, but the idea that peer review is bunk or that it's completely corrupted and all that, these are very, let's say, extreme views for now. Okay, I'll dissect that later. But the delusion comes into play when people make their own theories, but they don't put them in any actual scrutiny, because Old Hype's audience and JF's audience, the majority of them will agree with the theories or the hypotheses they produce. And that's okay. You know, I don't mind.
Wait a second. I'm sorry.
It's just not a way to verify it. Sorry, go on.
OneSpecies. I want to be fair to you. All right. I really do. I want this to be a fair conversation. But this is when I hear the word lie. This is what I think. I think the lie is something somebody says that they know that isn't true, but they're telling it.
When you lie to yourself, it's not exactly that. It's that you get too excited about things and you don't check them properly. You don't scrutinize them properly. It happens to everyone. It happens to atheists, theists, everyone. If you don't scrutinize your own thoughts enough, you're lying to yourself. I didn't mean any malintent there, at least for now. But
at least for now. So you think what? So you think that when JF says, "Look, I'm not part of the peer-reviewed process, and I don't even respect the peer-reviewed process," that his lack of respect for that mechanism of disseminating information is some kind of a self-delusion?
Well, to a degree, it's also self-contradictory, because when they pick up evidence to present in favor of races, they pick them up from the peer review system mainly. So okay. That's one controversy. The other problem is that, let's forget JF and Old Hype for a second.
Sure.
If I had a theory about things, okay, and even if it was my own, and if it was based on sources and stuff, for me to feel confident about it, I would have to take it through peer review. Nobody stops me from putting it on a paper and paying the fair amount and, you know, getting it administered by a peer-reviewed journal. It's not that hard to do. I wouldn't feel like it's the standard I hold for myself. I wouldn't tell people what to do with their heart disease medicine if I don't have some peer review on it. So I won't tell people what to think about human biodiversity if I don't have some peer review on it, or at least, you know, solid things that other people have verified. Because I can be biased, and that's the whole mentality of science. You come up with something, it might be very good, it might advance science for centuries, or it might be bunk. You get it, you hand it in to people with good expertise so that they can see if you're biased or not, so that they can see if your conclusions follow from your premises and your evidence.
Okay, well, I think that you've strawmanned in two ways, and I need to be firm with you on this, and I want to lay them out here for you so you can respond to them. One, when you say that the willingness of guys like JF and Ryan Falk to use peer-reviewed work is self-contradictory, I think that's a total straw man. JF has never said that the peer review process cannot or does not gatekeep valid, useful information. All he's ever said is that the gatekeeping part is no longer necessary, that in the world we're living in today, it isn't necessary to have this peer-reviewed process, and that, in fact, if you want a peer review process, you could design one that was way better than the one that's used, that the one that's used is functionally archaic. But saying that that process is archaic or inefficient or unnecessary doesn't mean that he doesn't believe anything that's peer-reviewed. That's a crazy position to impute to him. And two, you say, well, look, their position is that essentially that the things that they're saying, that the conclusions that they're coming to, should not have to be subject to scrutiny. I would say it's just the opposite. To them, from their perspective, the most effective kind of peer review that there is to take your ideas, throw them up on YouTube in front of tens of thousands of viewers, sometimes hundreds of thousands of viewers, and say, here's where my head's at. Here's what I've looked at the data. Here's what the data is. Here are my conclusions. And then guys like you, guys like OneSpecies, can take a crack at it and say, well, this is, here's the problem that I have with what you're saying. But if the only problem that you can bring, if the only argument that you can bring against them is this, is an appeal to authority, is to say, well, this isn't peer reviewed by honest to goodness scientists, then I would say that that's almost more an argument in their favor.
No, it's not, because that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that, or let me put it this way. If an imam starts explaining his theories on the surahs and the hadith, 90 to 98% of the attendants will love him and will agree with him. Now, there are valid criticisms against Islam and against specific arguments on theology too, like specific stuff. But they don't work. They've been around for hundreds of years. They don't work. Why? Because the main audience of the imams loves them anyway, whatever they say. So an audience in YouTube might include somebody like me with a critical approach on the thing, but in no sense of the word is YouTube any form of peer review, okay? Because you can click on equally popular videos or more popular videos, and you can for yourself see that they're peddling junk, but they're popular. Like they're anything from, SJW videos that are completely ludicrous by Vox to anything out there, and people will like it. That's not peer review. Now, they can have their opinions, and their opinions may be correct with or without peer review. It's that when they claim that science supports this, that's when you need the peer review. Because that's the standard we have in every other field of science, archaeology, pharmacology, you name it.
Is it possible for you to reformulate that argument without again resorting to a straw man? Because again, I've never heard them claim I've never heard them make that appeal to authority that you seem to be imputing to them.
But they do. Because, look, it's simple. I cannot make the appeal to authority because I'm not a scientist. I can direct people to evidence, and I can keep the original interpretation of the evidence as the scientist meant it.
What is a scientist?
Wait, before we go all postmodern here, wait, let me finish my sentence.
Sure.
What JF and Old Hype do is that they say, look, I'm an autodidact, or I'm a scientist already, so I read these papers in this way, and this way is correct because I said so. That's the appeal to authority. When I say that things need to be peer-reviewed, that's not appeal to authority. That's appeal to the scientific method. That's how we build shit for 200 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, so then it seems like what we're coming down here is just the contention not over whether or not ideas should be peer-reviewed. We're all on the same page there. Everybody agrees that ideas should be peer-reviewed. What we're coming down here is the only contention, it seems to me, which I really don't view as being very substantive, but so far this is the only one we've outlined, is the contention over whether or not a process like putting a video on YouTube for hundreds of thousands of people to watch and digest is in itself a peer review process. I would say yes, you would say no. So my question is really salient. It's not postmodern. What is a scientist?
That's the thing, though.
Well, wait a second.
It's not up to us if it is or not. You won't get a vaccine approved through the FDA by a YouTube video. It's not up to us, mate. Like Like, for all the shit lefties get and postmodernists get for defying authority and hierarchies, the racialist right is doing it a lot. Like, it's not my idea, or it's not like my opinion that YouTube is not peer review and your opinion that's not. It can't be peer review. Simple as that. It can be peer review in sociopolitical matters where everybody is an expert. Like, if something bothers me socially or as a citizen, I'm the expert. I don't need scientists. Don't need peer review. If my local government says I raise the taxes to 80%, I'm the expert to complain for that, not the scientists. But for every other endeavor in society, we have decided that, for engineering, it's the engineers, and for hearts, it's the cardiologists. And all that is based on peer review. It's not my opinion, and it's the current hierarchy of things. Not because they have the authority, but because they have the tools to know whether something holds true or not. That's the thing.
Do you see this?
Does not have those tools. I mean,
wait a second. Do you see? I really am. This is a genuine question. This is not a gotcha or a rhetorical question. Can you not see the circuity of your argument? So you say, look, the reason why peer review is necessary is because of authority. Society is granted authority, like the FDA was an example that you used, only to those sort of institutions, those outlets, those purveyors of ideas and information, which are peer reviewed. And then you finish that by saying, but it's not because of their authority. It's not because of their authority. It's because they're the only ones who can do it, indicating that there's
we give the U.S. Army the authority to take on the defense of the United States because they have the tools. And we give scientists the authority to conduct science because they have the tools. The authority is not what makes them right. Being right is what gives them the authority, because they have the tools to be right. It's not that nobody else can be right. Other people can be right too. It's just that the other people don't have the tools to know when they're wrong. That's science does not focus on getting things right. It focuses on understanding when you're wrong. And that's what most people get wrong. Sorry for that pun, but that's what most people get wrong in society. Anyway, that's why we made science, because daily thinking does not lend itself to long-term verifiable conclusions.
What is a scientist?
A scientist?
Yeah, what is a scientist? I mean, aside from...
We're drifting off topic.
No, it's the linchpin of your argument. Look, the linchpin of your argument is only scientists have the authority to talk about race. That's what I'm hearing from you.
Everyone has the authority to talk about race.
Then what is your problem with JF?
Wait. Scientists are the only ones that have the authority to say what science says about race. That's the trick. JF.
Oh, okay. So let me update my question. What is science? Right? What is science? And before you answer, I'll give my answer. I'll just throw out my bias here.
I'm sure there are 10,000 videos on YouTube explaining what is science.
Yeah, but
I think to make this conversation interesting, we need to drift away from what the peer review says or not and go into the juicy stuff. Why is race such a contestable issue in society? Why do some people think it helps in politics? Why do some people think it's destructive about politics? What does it tell us socially? Is there any good information in it? That's what we need to talk about, because about peer reviews, you're not the expert, I'm not the expert, and nobody here in the stream is going to read the peer reviews now. So,
okay, we'll put a pin in it, and we'll get to whatever it is that you want to talk about, because I am interested in what's on your mind. So let's start wherever you want.
Okay, so first of all, a lot of advocates of race are describing race as as common knowledge, as something that everybody accepted in the past, as something that was more or less acceptable until the whatever lefties or the progressives came over and made it politically incorrect. The problem with that is that historically, racialist views on the world are very recent. They started with colonialism because it was the fastest transition of people from continent to continent with the least amount of cultural exchange. Previous exchanges and movements of people around the world did not produce the same results. For example, ancient Greeks, ancient Romans, all these people would refer to other people, other tribes, with their ethnic names. They could separate them, not like by color, because that wouldn't tell them much. Like maybe the Ethiopians were friendly, but the Egyptians were hostile. So just saying black did not exactly convey any useful information for them. So for all the literature we can see, nobody refers to the Europeans as whites, and nobody refers to the Asians as yellows, and nobody's referring to Africans as black. They all have either their proper ethnic names or a name given by the author because they don't know the real name. So that does not mean that we have to take Roman and Greek assumptions as science today. It just means that historically, this representation that racialist views were the common sense for thousands of years is just not true. Most people, especially if they had writing, they would refer to other people by their proper names. And they would also assign to them different behaviors. Like Greeks did not think the Ethiopians act exactly like Nubians or exactly like Egyptians either. They understood ethnic barriers, ethnic diversity, and stuff like that. When racialism started appearing, it was because Europeans who were quite ethnically isolated in the west of Europe, with 2 or 3 dominant ethnicities that almost looked identical, when they started spreading around, they ran into people that looked extremely different from them. But that's because they went by sea and with the fastest boats we ever had. For the Romans that were traveling slowly, none of the biological diversity of people was challenging, because as they were traveling, they would notice that this neighbor looks a little bit like me and a little bit like the next neighbor. And the next neighbor looks a bit like their adjacent neighbors. So when Romans were traveling, they experienced a gradient. Like Italians kind of look like Illyrians, but not exactly. And Illyrians kind of look like the Danube people, but not exactly. And they could see that continuum. If you leave England in a boat and you reach Australia, you've traveled like the furthest genetic distance you could find. And if you have not witnessed any of the people in between, of course, when you arrive, you say, what are those alien looking people? So it makes sense for these ideas to arise at that time.
Do you think that it is invalid to categorize the human race, the human species, into different races?
Yes, because first of all, because of the concept of race itself. For example, in biology, there are lineages, okay, who mean distinct persons in space and time that are connected, though, by genetic heritage. And lineages can span back from Neanderthals all the way to today. Like, it depends on how deep you want to go. But lineages, you see, are not only, scientifically established, observed, and quantified. It's not that I care for too much. It's that lineages are not formed as exclusive groups. Lineages cross ethnic barriers, they cross language barriers. They're exactly what the label says. They just track people who had sex together. Now,
Right.
now the race thing is problematic because it wants to describe people who had sex together, but instead of that, it describes people who appear to have had sex together if the average American looks at them. Sorry, but biologically, these are two very different things.
Am I right in, am I correct in understanding that your position is that it's invalid to categorize the human race into races, the human species into races, but it is valid to categorize us into ethnicities?
Look, first of all, ethnicities arise on their own. It's not that you have to categorize them. They exist. They spring from the ground. Like once you get a people that speaks a certain language and a dialect, and they feel different from others, and they keep their culture alive together, that's an ethnicity. I don't have to point it out. They already exist. It's like a mountain. It's there.
So isn't there something
So, yeah,
a little bit?
ethnicities are valid.
So
And
I just want to make sure. I want to make sure. I hate to keep interrupting you, but I just want to make
it's
sure
okay,
we're on
go
the same page here. From one species perspective, ethnicity exists, but race does not.
Well, race for me exists as a temporal, can exist rather, as a temporal social construct for people to, just communicate useful stuff during their day.
Useful how?
Well, in America, for example, that arose out of a very specific set of circumstances that had European migrants or settlers and a separate caste of slaves that were kept separately and blah, blah, blah. You end up with a country that some people might look European and some people might look African. So if you want to report in a crime, it's very useful to know if the person looks African or if the person looks European. It can save you time and blah, blah, blah. Okay? So in that sense, race is a temporal social construct that people use just to communicate daily necessity and meaning without giving too much scientific credence to it. Yeah, of course, like we already use it. I don't have any problem with that. The problem is when people try to take that and project it back on genetics as genetic determinism or racial ideas. Because, for example, let me give you an example. Maybe somebody is from southern India and maybe they look very African to me, okay? And maybe they commit a crime against me and I report, and the fact that I reported them looking African helped in the arrest. But it was all wrong. Biologically, it was baseless. Like the Indians are further from the Europeans than Africans. So that whole theory, biologically, it would be bunk. But socially, for that specific arrest, yeah, it helped. Although it was wrong. And I can live with it. I don't have a problem. So ethnicity is valid beyond a temporal, superficial language we can use to express things daily. Ethnicity is there because most people throughout history have children with people of the same language.
So what if you did this? What if you took a group of ethnicities? Let's say, well, first of all, let's rattle off some ethnicities. Let's do that, yeah? So would you agree that, like, for example, Celtic is an ethnicity? Is that what you think of when you think of ethnicity? You think of, like, the Celtic people are an ethnicity?
Well, since there's some distance in time, the Celtic peoples were a set of tribes, but right now they have developed into distinct ethnicities. Like Some of them, some of their lineages end up in France. Some of the lineages end up in Northern Europe.
Well, okay, give me an example of an ethnicity. What is an ethnicity in your opinion? Or what was an example of an ethnicity?
Italians, French,
Okay,
Spanish.
all right, so let's start there. So let's say you took Italians, that's an ethnicity. And then you said French, that's a good one, that's an ethnicity, I agree with that. And then you said Spanish, Spaniards, I agree. Spaniards are their own ethnicity. And I would even say, you know, maybe you could subdivide Spaniards into Basques and Catalans and different things. But
Yeah,
that's
there
an
are
ethnic
also
group.
subgroups, yeah.
And then let's say you took, you know, Germans, that's an ethnicity. And then let's throw in, for good measure, let's throw in Englishmen, or Britons we'll call them, and say that's an ethnicity. What if you took this group? So I've got 5 ethnicities right now that we've listed off by my count. What if you took those 5 ethnicities and you said, now I'm going to take them, I'm going to put them in a group of ethnicities, and I'm just going to give that group a name, just a placeholder to say this group of these 5 ethnicities, and we'll just call that name white. We'll call it white, the white race. What's the problem with that?
Well, the only problem is, what do you want to use that for? If you want to use it just to refer to many ethnicities as a group, yeah, okay, you can do that. If you want to mean, though, that these people are an exclusive group and then some other ethnicities are another exclusive group, then you need evidence, and you don't have it.
Why? Why do you need evidence for that?
Well, because you need evidence for all reasonable conclusions. Otherwise, they're not reasonable. They're just wishful thinking. I don't know, like...
I would say that taxonomy isn't really a conclusion. Taxonomy, no matter who does it, whether it's a verified taxonomist or a real scientist or a member of a certain priestly class, or if it's just a normal person like you or me, whoever practices or engages in taxonomy is ultimately doing something entirely subjective, are they not?
No. Science is the exact opposite of entirely subjective. That's why we have it.
If taxonomy isn't subjective, how is a taxonomical group proven? How can you prove the existence, let's not say existence, how can you prove, because science is about really proving and disproving, how can you prove the validity of a taxonomical group?
Dude, are we gonna do taxonomy one-on-one on a stream? It's impossible. Like, there's literature, there's literature on how this thing is done.
You know what I'm noticing about you, OneSpecies, is you have a sort of a two-pronged tactic. You start with an appeal to authority, and then
no. Let me save you some time. I don't have a tactic. I have standards. If we're gonna call something science, it has to come from the peer review method. If we're gonna call something our opinion, it has to come from our mouths. And if we're gonna call something practically usable, it must have some correspondence to reality. And the best tool we have to extract reality out of what we witness is science. So these are standards. They're not my tactic. A tactic is for racialists to, you know, call upon Western values whenever it's convenient, but completely topple them when it's not. Because, you know, scientific inquiry is a Western value. Sorry. The non-relativist nature of natural, of physical truth is non-debatable. It's in the Western world.
Okay, so to understand your position, you're saying that taxonomical groups exist, that they have that not the groups themselves, not the members of the category, but that the category itself as an idea, that has a real existence, whether it's physical or metaphysical, and that some categories are correct and some categories are incorrect as a reality, not simply as a conceptual framework created and used by human beings to help them organize things that are real, but as a thing that's real in and of itself. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I mean, I just fundamentally disagree with that, and I think probably, you know, now I'm going to make my own appeal to popularity here, but I think probably 90% of people, at least, don't see it that way. Aren't you just kind of, I mean, you're sort of just railing against the world when you say, wait a second, guys, you can't categorize books by whether or not their covers are green or brown. You have to categorize them by how many pages they have. It doesn't matter. To most people, it's just a category. And categories to most people, and including to me, are entirely subjective.
Well, then, if we took that standard, there would be no engineering, nothing applicable in science. If we took it as a field where, you know, everything is a subjective statement, none of the Western civilization you see around you would be.
Yeah, I got to stop you. I want you to try to learn to argue without straw manning. I never said...
I'm not straw manning, man.
Well, here's the thing. I never said at any point in time that everything is subjective. I never said any statement you could ever make is subjective. There is no discrete reality. What I said is that categories are subjective. Whether or not something belongs in a specific category is really just up to the person creating the category.
You can say categories when it comes to science, because right now we're talking about stuff that touches upon science again. When it comes to science, you can say that categories are not absolute. They might change over time with the inflow of new evidence or new experiments. You can say that the categories are not set to stone forever. You can say that the categories are still our best estimation, not reality itself. But the criteria for the categories, if we're talking about science, are not subjective. That's the thing. If they're categories made by science, they're not subjective. They might be not absolute. They might not be perfect in 5,000 years. But for the time being, they're what the most objective estimation is. They're not subjective views. So, but we drifted again into the research. Let's go back into the social stuff a bit, because that's where the juice is. Because let me give you an example. When scientists,
wait a second.
When
I'm OneSpecies. I'm going to let you finish, but I just want to make a prediction here. Yeah. My prediction is that the example that you're going to give me is going to take you away from having to come to a final conclusion on this category question, just in the same way that we ended up having to stick a pin.
No, I just answered the category question. Scientific categories are not subjective. That's it. When they say this person is diabetic, maybe the category is slightly vague. Maybe the category has some problems, but the criteria of the category are not subjective. The guy's diabetic for reasons.
Yeah, but I would say that when you categorize the world into diabetic people and non-diabetic people, you may not be doing so on a basis which is arbitrary or random. And I agree with you. That's what a category is. A category is not something arbitrary. The inclusion of something in a category is not arbitrary or random. That is based on discrete reality. But in categorizing the world into people who are diabetic and people who aren't, you're making a subjective decision. You're saying, here's the category I want to create. I want to create a category that groups everybody in the world into two different buckets.
No, sorry. That's how racialism thinks. In actual science, they saw people that had certain symptoms that others didn't have, and then they saw those people dying. So they studied the symptoms, they found the cause, they explained why people die, and therefore they say we need this. There's this whole new category of people that metabolize things differently and they die because of it, and we need a name. They didn't make the category, they observed it. They just gave it a name we can use.
Yeah, we agree. We're on the same page.
And they called it diabetes.
Yeah, well, you just reformulated what I said. I mean,
no, it's very different. What you said.
What's the difference?
I want to make a category right here. No, trust me, nobody wanted to make a category called diabetics.
Yeah, no.
The category arises from the data, and then you give it a name because you have to be able to communicate it as a human.
Well, that sounds like a great that sounds like a perfect explanation for why the categories of different races exist. Look, somebody didn't wake up, Charles Linnaeus, who by the way was a scientist, didn't wake up one day and say, well, you know, I'm just going to randomly decide that 4 is a good number, and then I'm going to take all the different people in the world and I'm going to categorize them into 4 different groups, and I'm going to invent what the characteristics of those groups are right now out of whole cloth. Some of them have 3 eyes, some of them have wings and can fly. No, he started with the data. He said, oh, here's the data. Human beings are different. They all look different, but their differences are categorizable. They're discernible. They're non-random. And then he said, okay, now that I've got the data, I'm going to create some categories. Just like a scientist creates the category diabetic to describe data, certain symptoms, the creation of the category actually, yes, I will maintain the creation of the category is subjective. It's subjective to say these are the data that I'm going to lump into this category and call it diabetic people.
No,
but it doesn't matter. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Let's say that it's not okay. Then I will.
The difference from woo-woo science and from channels like the Spirit channel, whatever it's called, Spirit Energy, whatever, and that's the difference from crystal healing to antibiotics. Okay, sorry, it's not trivial difference.
Okay, sure. Then I'll just concede the point because it really doesn't matter. Let's say that it isn't subjective. I don't see how it has bearing.
No,
it's the exact same process.
Let's go back to your example. There's this guy, he's a scientist, he observed differences in people. He said, here are 4 categories that describe the way these differences are grouped. Okay?
Correct.
Fair enough. Well, problem is he only did the first step of the scientific ladder. He only made a hypothesis based on observations. He never went into enough trouble to disprove it. Because when scientists come up with a hypothesis, they don't labor to prove it. They labor to disprove it. It's just that when they fail to disprove it, then it must be true. That's how science works. They don't start with, okay, my hypothesis is this. What's the evidence that supports the hypothesis? Otherwise, we would be dying in the streets, dude. Medicine would be crap. What scientists do is, okay, this is my hypothesis. Now let's find a way to debunk it. And if we can't debunk our hypothesis over a reasonable amount of data and research, then it's probably true. Like, that's the thing with scientists. They're never even telling you, we're sure about this, kiddo. They're telling you that to the best of our ability and according to the best data, this seems to be the case. So the difference with the scientist you said is that, you know, he came up with a nice little set of 4 races that was convenient to him. He supposedly based it on observations, but there were not keen enough mechanisms there to peer review that thing and falsify it, basically. Check if it's false.
Well, I mean, let me just jump on Wikipedia here real quick, just to try to figure out when Carolus Linnaeus lived, because I want to get a concept of the time frame that we're talking about. So, Linnaeus.
I can give you time frame. By the time, like,
okay,
from Darwin to now, most of the things that Darwin said have been reevaluated, readapted, and changed.
Okay, so yeah, so this guy died in 1778. So my question for you is, if his categorization of the human species into 4 different racial groups, had it been subjected to the scrutiny of the peer review process, could have been proven to be non-predictive and therefore useless. Why hasn't it been done? I mean, it's been, we've had, you know, 200 years. We've had 250 years to do this. Why hasn't it been done?
it has been done, dude. There's endless peer review, both articles, opinion pieces, and research on why all the racialist categorizations up until recently, all those formulations are wrong, and the reasons they're wrong. There's all that literature. This is reminiscent of some, I don't know, I don't want to make any guilt by association here, but this is reminiscent of some kind of like Alex Jones moments, or like the creationist thing with a missing link. Like if you read biology, we come up with a new missing link from humans to apes every second week. But for the creationists, from 1955 till now, we're still looking for the missing link. So
you know what I think is, you know what I find to be one of the weirdest things about you is that you have this constant recourse to science, science, science. You talk about science and the idea of science, and yet
you want to say that
why don't you let me finish a thought here? OneSpecies.
I'm gonna try to save you time. So I'm only saving you time.
I would rather you not save me time.
Okay.
I'd rather finish my thought.
Okay.
Just to be fair, you talk a lot about science, and I find you to be sort of an anti-scientific person yourself, and here's why. Oh no, don't you dare say that. Science to you, it seems to me, it's almost more like a priestly religion. But you spend your time, you sort of bend your wheel, your whetstone.
I'm not bending anything. I'm just
science denialism.
Look. I'm not bending anything. I find this highly intellectually dishonest. I'm not bending anything. I'm just trying to explain things as they are, okay? I don't even find any support for what you just claimed.
It seems to me like every science denialist that I've ever encountered, people who say that we've never landed on the moon, people who say people who say that race isn't real, people who say that evolution isn't real, they always pretend, they always couch their perspective in science itself. They say, "Wow, this is the real science." Real scientists know that
you're way out of line.
There's no such thing as evolution.
Way out of line. There's no moon landing denier. There's no moon landing denier that is either using or not using peer review or science. Like they just make claims based on how photos appear to them. Okay, like putting people who don't accept race, like 80% of the biologists out there, in the same scope with people who deny moon landings. Sorry, I just don't accept this as an argument. Try better.
Wait a second. 80%. Here's my perspective. All right, I'm just trying to give you my perspective. This is what life feels like to me, not as a scientist, but just as a schmuck on the street.
Yeah.
Everybody I know thinks that we really did land on the moon. Everybody I know thinks that evolution is real, that it's a real thing. Everybody I know thinks that the world can be, that the human species can be categorized into different races, and that if you do that, that will have...
Jesus, I'm glad I don't live where you live, but do go on.
Okay, great. So let me go on then. So you notice that when you talk, I really try to let you get your thoughts out before I jump in.
I'm trying to squeeze in some bands. Go on, please.
So everybody I know, has these sort of basic core thoughts that they go around saying, well, I really do think that we did land on the moon. I think that evolution is real. I'm not a evangelical creationist. I think that race is a reality because I can see it with my own eyes. And then every once in a while, sort of a nutter will come along and say, hey, those moon landings, that was filmed in a basement. Or, hey, evolution is just a lie that was made up by Jesuits. And, if you were an evangelical Christian, you'd know that God created ducks and crocodiles and human beings all at the same time. Or they'll say, it'll be some sociologist type who will say, hey, race isn't real. Just who are you going to believe? My academic papers or your lying eyes? And they always, to a man, every single one of them says, well, this is real science. You see, if you read the real, true literature, Then you would know that actually I'm right and everybody else is wrong. And you're really falling into that.
No,
you're falling. I mean, I'm just telling you. This
look,
is to me. You're falling into that that
Look,
mold.
A, I'm not falling into anything. B, everything you described is of zero consequence ever, both to the mechanics of this world and to science. Like, the very first thing they do is they discard this exact line of thinking you presented. This looks to me like this, there, and many people believe it. Therefore, like, okay, I appreciate it, but that's just because everybody you know believes in evolution, and everybody you know believes in race, and everybody you know believes in gravity. It doesn't mean these things are in any way either related, equivalent, or corresponded with each other. The only thing it means is that people are not, they're not putting their beliefs through the peer review method. That's what it means. We know it. That's why we invented science, to avoid it. Now, to the juice of the point. Okay, if you were born in Riyadh, everybody you know would know that women have half the brain capacity of men, and half the moral value of men, and half the witness value of men. If you were born in Riyadh, you would know that God's name is Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. And every once in a while, a waka passes by and tells you, no, it's Jesus, or there is no God and shit. But they're retarded, because everybody you know believes Muhammad is the prophet of the one God, Allah. And if you lived in Riyadh, you would believe that everybody you know would believe that Americans are the evil spawn of Satan. So what all the people you know believe, it's completely worthless on an empirical level, with great demonstrations like North Korea, Saudi Arabia, Iran, half of Russia. Like the poorest part of Russia still believe in witch doctors. If you were there, everybody you know would believe in witch doctors. In what capacity is that worth any empirical attention?
So if I was trying to convince somebody in Riyadh that Islam was a mistake, I think the last thing I would do is make an appeal to an otherworldly priest class and say, look,
I'm not making an appeal to another worldly priest class. I'm making an appeal to the same guys that make my voice possible to reach your voice through the wires and connect to the ears of the audience. It's not a cabal. They have names: engineers, biologists, chemists. They have names. It's not a fucking cabal.
Yeah, but the problem is there's no reason for me to believe, and in fact, the assertion is absurd on its face, that the guys who designed computers, the guys who designed telephones, the guys who discovered how to harness electricity, that these guys did not believe in race. I mean, we know that they, who's one of the most famous electricians of all time? Ben Franklin. And he was such a believer in race that he wanted to ban Germans from entering the United States because he thought that they were racially inferior. Clearly,
can Ben Franklin repair your router when it goes down?
Ben Franklin's dead. It's an absurd question.
Exactly.
Yeah,
you know who else?
You know who else can't
when we're talking about
who else can't repair my router? Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein. It doesn't invalidate somebody's works or achievements that they're no longer around to help us out. I mean, this is such a primitive level of thinking on your part.
No, dude, yours is the primitive level of thinking. I am presenting Olympian amounts of patience to explain it to you. Listen, it's very, very simple. Darwin is not the current standard in evolution, and Franklin is not the current standard in electrical engineering. Okay, and even if all the electric engineers in the world believed race is real, still that wouldn't change whether race is a social construct or whether race is biological. That would still be an empirical question itself. Okay, that's how you do the what's it called again? Argument from authority. because when I am saying scientists say these things, I mean their arguments. I don't mean their status, their status in society. If an engineer tells me that my chair needs that component, it's his job because he's the engineer. If a biologist tells me I need that antibiotic, I don't believe him because he's a biologist. I believe him because biology enables him to know and suggest, and also suggest verified stuff. Now, let's put that aside for a second. Let's face what you're saying on its face. You're basically making the argument from popularity and you're elevating it to argument from authority. You're telling me first, you went on a tangent that if you wanted to dissuade the people in Riyadh, you wouldn't call upon whatever, a cabal of people. Okay, again, that's wrong, because racists are not sitting, or racialists are not sitting in their own country somewhere and I'm going there telling them, hey, look, change your views. What is happening is they're bringing arguments to the public space, and those arguments are getting criticized. So I didn't start with any intent to change anyone's mind. Racial advocates start with intent to change people's minds, okay? And they face the criticism. So back to the Riyadh example, though. You see how a whole society can believe in things that not only you don't believe, you also know they're not true, okay? So how can you give any value to your argument that everyone you know believes something? There's no value in that argument. In Africa, if you go to certain areas, everybody you know there believes in voodoo magic. That doesn't mean anything. You see, there was that social justice warrior in the University of Cape Town saying, like, we need to decolonize science, as if they're going to discover a different, more African gravity or something. You see how this stuff destroys other civilizations, okay? You see how it keeps people backward. Why would you suggest it's a good way to measure anything?
Okay, I think that your points are very well made. So let me suggest like an armistice within the context of this conversation. What if going forward, neither one of us, for the rest of this conversation, makes an appeal to authority, either an appeal to the authority of the masses or an appeal to the authority of specific scientists or biologists? What if we, going forward, just talk about reality as we can define it and prove it? Can we do that if we both agree to?
Yeah. Well, okay. I agree with you apart from the very last point. We won't define any reality. We will exchange our observations on reality, okay?
Oh, sure, that's fair. That's fair.
Okay.
Now, you characterized our positions relative to what most people think. And I'm going to talk about this not as a support or a proof for what I believe, but just as a way of expressing where I see myself in the world.
Okay.
You said that you weren't the person who had something to prove that I was. And this is how I see things. The way that I see things is that both of us have positions which are fundamentally out of step with the mainstream. What I experience is that the vast majority of people, not just who I interact with on a daily basis, but all around the world, recognize the existence of race. So let's just call those people are separate from us. We'll just call them like the middle. The world, we'll call them. And you and I are sort of at different poles, and we're saying different things. And what I'm saying to those people is, you recognize that race exists, and I want to make the assertion that race also has predictive value, that you can make a prediction about somebody based on their race. That's like the racist hypothesis, let's say.
Yeah. Let's call it racialist for good aesthetics.
Okay, for good optics, we'll call it racialist instead of racist, whatever. And then you are saying, I feel like you're on the other side of the pole. You're on the opposite pole, saying race. Not only is race not predictive, but it actually isn't even real. It has no biological basis. It's just a social construct. Am I right? Am I characterizing your position correctly?
Yes, I could expand a bit if you allow me.
I would love you to. I would love you to.
Okay. The observation that people of African descent in America, people of very recent African descent, because as far as haplogroups go, they show that we all come from Africa if you go back in far enough in time. But, you know, the observation, a person on the street in New York, okay, let's take that example. Their observation that Joe looks very different from George, okay, and Joe looks more like somebody who came from Africa, and George looks more like somebody who came from Europe. That is real, okay? That is a real observation. The person is observing something that is objectively different. There is some difference. I mean, it's not two white mannequins and the street worker of New York projects a black face on one of them and a white face on the other. They're clearly different. So far, so good?
So far, so good.
Okay. Now, the problem with that is that a huge amount of factors go into how that streetwalker of New York will perceive these two people. And then again, a huge amount of factors go into how these people arrived there. So a good initial observation might be that, yeah, they look different. But every next step of extrapolation is in danger of being completely surreal unless grounded on evidence. Let me give you an example. There was a population from Europe, the Gauls. Part of the Gauls, some tribes of the Gauls, wandered around too much around the Roman Empire and Byzantium, and they got lost. And you know, through generations, at some point, they arrived in Anatolia, in modern Turkey, okay? And they stayed there, okay? And there's a name in the region, Galatia or whatever. Now, phenotypically, they have kept some of the blue eyes and some of the blonde hair, okay? But everybody they know, to touch a little bit on the experience you had, and then I'll try to bridge it to what actually happens too. But everybody they know considers them Turks, and they themselves consider themselves Turks. Now, if I bring in a concept like lineages, it explains that very well, because it says that these people have a genetic substrate that comes from Central and Northern Europe, but through the magic of time and distance, they arrived in this predominantly Anatolian area. But they also intermixed there, but they also adopted the culture there. So, the observation that they make and everybody else makes around them that they're Turks, socially it stands. They feel Turks. But the lineages also explain why they look slightly different than Turks and where they came from. Now, if I use the concept like race, it's not that flexible. I cannot like squeeze it past what are they now? Are they European? Are they white? Are they Turkish? But Turkish is not a race. So are they what? Are they Middle Eastern? But what about the genetic heritage they still carry from Europe? But lineage squeezes through all these questions very finely, because lineage limits the predictive power. It's specific. It also limits the interest, the scope. It just cares about people who actually had sex with each other, not with people like that look like they had sex with each other, So lineage can squeeze by all the questions, give me all the information, and be real in the actual biological sense, and also give me information I want to know, like statistically, if I want to see if these people perform any differently than more native Turks, lineage can still give me that capacity and that categorization. So then my question becomes, how would race perform superior as a superior definition in that example?
Well, I've never made the assertion that it would. So maybe, you know what would be useful? Here, let me go through just my concept of what race actually is. That way we'll both be on the same page. We'll be talking about the same thing. Is that fair?
Just a caveat. If it's very far from what 90% of people think when they hear the word race, I will have to point it out, but do go on.
Well, I mean, I don't, sure. I'm not asking you to spare any criticism. If you have any criticisms at all, that my views are unpopular, I mean, again, I feel like the popularity thing, we kind of made an agreement earlier that we wouldn't make appeals to authority, and I kind of felt like it was obvious that that would also mean that we wouldn't make appeals to popularity. But if you want to do that, if you want to go back on that agreement,
no, I think I'm keeping it. I'm not referring to scientific research per se, and I'm not referring to popular arguments per se. I'm saying there's this definition that, at least what I said up to now, is there's this definition of this human biodiversity that can squeeze through real life examples, and there's this other definition that doesn't seem to do it. That was my point. I didn't refer neither to popularity nor authority.
No, but you said that if my views were unpopular, you would point them out.
Not unpopular. It has to do with the semantics. I could right now use the word Hitler in the stream, but to mean a tiny, cute, little, fragile bunny. The problem with that is that, okay, I have the right to do it, but most people won't think a tiny, fragile little bunny when I say Hitler. So it's a problem of semantics. Like, I'm not saying I will discard your definition if it's unpopular. What I'm saying is the debate is about race as I guess, as most people would have the concept. If we go completely out of what race is taken to mean socially, I don't think we're useful. You can still make that argument. I just don't think we're useful. That's it.
Okay, that's fair. Can you see what if on your screen? Can you see? I have MS Paint open. Are you able to see that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm hoping everybody else at home can see it too. Let me just check. I'm going to take a quick look at the stream. How are we doing here, chat? If there's any, I can see it on the screen. Chat, if we can make any improvements, just let us know. All right. So the way I see it is there are races, and I personally categorize the world into 5 races, but the idea is there are races. I'll just throw my racial categories up there. So I've got white. Let's see here. Black, yellow, red, and the most recent one, Aborigine. I think I'm spelling correctly, but if I'm not, let me know, guys. And I'm going to try to squeeze them all in here. Right? So, get rid of this. And, you know, maybe Aborigine is a little weird. It's a little different because by Aborigine, I'm talking about Australian Aborigines. They're kind of a recent discovery. But this is my idea, is that there are these different races, right? Now, for me, and also I want to say, other people in the world, some people really view the world as only having 4 races. That was Charles Linnaeus. That was his idea, was that there were 4 races. Of course, he lived at a time when we didn't know about the Aborigines of Australia, but he viewed the world as having 4. Some people would say 3, some people would say 6. And the number of races that you want to designate, as JF famously said, it doesn't matter. You could say there were 600 races, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't invalidate race as a concept. It's just a taxonomical concept. And then what you do is you say, okay, there are these races. Now we're going to talk about, there's this other thing called ethnicity. Okay,
first, I have a comment for what you said right now, but I want to withhold it for now. I would suggest you do something different with the paint right now. I would suggest you either delete or pull ethnicity on the side. And what I want you to do is I want you to list, for these list of races you have put there on screen, I want you to list what predictive powers this categorization gives you. I won't be pedantic. I don't want you to tell me something as specific as like this categorization gives us an 85% accurate whatever prediction on IQ. I want, you know, general brushes, you know, general stuff like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. What are your, I mean, okay, these people look like that. Some people kind of look black. Some people kind of look yellow. Some people kind of look Aboriginal. Good. I mean, but these are just observational names. Nobody has a controversy. Well, not nobody, but most people are not finding race as a bad definition because of the names. So list me what would you would think these names predict. Not by race, just general categories. List it as you wish. Keep it short, keep it simple. It's just give me the correspondence. How are these predictive in your view?
Well, I really want to give you an honest and fair answer to that. But I do want to sort of finish what I'm doing here, just so that not for you, because you're such a smart guy that you probably have already guessed exactly where I'm going to go with this. But for the audience, just so everybody, whoever watches this video, knows exactly what I mean when I talk about race, and also to make sure, to be honest, that you and I are on the same page. But then I will answer that question. So I would say, just to keep
I never claimed to be a smart guy, though.
Okay, well, I'm claiming it. I'm saying you're clearly a very bright guy, all right? So that much is obvious to me. So now I'm saying, look, we've got ethnicity, all right? And ethnicity, to me, to my eyes, as somebody who does believe that race is a biological, not just a social concept, ethnicity is wholly encompassed within race. It is a subcategory of race. So any ethnicity you can name, here, let's do that. Let's name some ethnicity. So name an ethnicity.
Chechens.
Chechens are white. So there we go. So I'll just throw Chechens in here. Here we go. Boom. Chechens. Is that how it's spelled? Is that right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I could be wrong. So give me another one. Chechens was a great one.
Oh yeah, let's go for other ones. What are they called? Indonesians?
Indonesians are yellow. There we go. So we throw Indonesians over here, right? Indonesians. Is that right? Who knows? There's no spell check on this version of Paint. All right, give me some more. Give me some more.
I won't discredit you for spelling errors. Bantu people.
Bantu, there we go. Those are black people. So there we go. So this is an ethnic category, but it also falls within a racial category. All right, give me some more. Give me some more. I love this. This is fun.
You know, you could keep up with yourself. Like you could put what were they called? Come on. The Indians that had a nice, good republic that were not as you know, as not as warlike as other Native Americans. What were Urukai? Was that their name? Urukai?
The Cherokee, maybe?
Yeah.
All right, let's just say Cherokee. So there we go. That's the noble red man. It's right in the name, red. So there we go. Cherokee. That one I do know how to spell because I drive a Jeep Cherokee. Named after the original inhabitants of this land. Okay, so is
it related to Elizabeth Warren?
Only by 6,197th. So I'm just gonna fill these in really quickly so that we get a
Yeah,
broad
add
sense
some,
of this.
and if I disagree with anything,
Well,
I'll tell you. But keep filling up the list.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is instead of just adding individual ethnicities here, I'm just going to add broad, like really, really broad groups. So all native Australians, right?
Okay.
So the native Australians. And by that, I don't mean every human being who was born in Australia, just to make sure we're on the same page, but the people who were indigenous to Australia when the first white men arrived on that continent. That's what I think when I think of Aborigines.
Okay, good. Can we add a few to make it a little bit harder?
Oh yeah, let's make it harder. Throw some hard ones at me.
Throw in the French and the Spanish.
Okay, the French and the Spanish. Come on, that's not so hard. That's easy. Those guys are white. All right. French. Spanish. Boom. All right, what else? You said you were going to give me hard ones.
Yeah. You will see why they're hard in the future. That's the beauty of it.
Oh, this is good. I'm excited.
Keep adding a few on your own because my inspiration is low right now. Keep adding a few, and let's see how this builds up.
Well, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to add exhaustive categories now. So I would say all Native American tribes. And we need to make this a little wider so it fits. All Native American tribes, I would say, are red. Yellow, this is a tricky one, right? Because Asia is so big that not everybody, you think of yellow peoples, the yellow race, you think of Asians, but not everybody from Asia is yellow. Siberians, a lot of them are white, right? People in India I would categorize as white. So what do? We say Far East Asians. And then we can give some examples. We'll put in some parentheses here. We'll say like Japanese, whoops, Chinese, oh, I don't know, who else? Koreans, and we'll just put in etc. because people are smart enough to know where we're going with that. You got some more tricky ones for me?
In terms of Asians, you could add Indians, Persians.
Okay,
Syrians.
but those guys are white, so we would want to put them over here. Indians, Persians, Syrians are Arabs, so I'd rather just say Arabs if that's all right.
Are you listing Arabs on white?
Yeah.
Just
can
you
see?
Okay.
Can you not see this? What I'm showing here? Oh no, is this no longer presenting?
I can see it. I can see it. No.
Okay.
I'm just making sure I'm seeing correctly.
Okay. So then I'm just gonna finish this out real quick. I'm gonna say black is all sub-Saharan Africans. I'm gonna say white is all Europeans plus all Europeans plus Siberians, say I've locked my oh, I see what it is. You know what it is? It's this version of Paint won't let you keep typing if you
Oh yeah.
Russian, Siberians.
Yeah, you could make the all-inclusive lists a smaller font, maybe. Like,
yeah, maybe I could and probably should, but I like to just do things in the same order or in the same. I'm anal retentive like that. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the screen a little bit bigger, and then I'll say we've already included Indians, so I don't need to say Indians. So then I'll say all Middle Easterners. That's easy. Middle East is Easterners. Middle East is a really broad category. It encompasses North Africans, people from North Africa, all the way over to Pakistan. right? So, okay, so now I've got these categories, and I say,
By the way, which column would host the Berbers?
well, the Berbers, you know, that's interesting. If you read really old stuff about the Berbers, you know, stuff that like the Carthaginians and the Romans wrote about the Berbers. The Berbers were white people. They even were said to have had blonde hair.
They still exist. I mean, I think Zidane or somebody is related to them.
Yeah, so let me take a look. Let me take a look at a modern Berber and see if they're still white. So I'll just type in Berbers, and let's see if we get a picture. I mean, a lot of them live in places like Morocco. And I'm not seeing any photographs of any modern day people. But if you say they still exist, I believe you. Okay, here we go. So I've got a picture of a Berber woman, and I'm going to share this. So I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to start sharing this other thing. So here we go. So I found this picture of a Berber lady. There we go. They're still white. They used to be white, and they still are. So yeah, the Berbers, and that makes sense too with the category that I made, because I said all Middle Easterners, and the Berbers are Middle Eastern people.
Well, yeah, they're kind of North African, but even politically, it's called MENA. It's called Middle East North Africa. Whatever. Go with it. I'm with you.
Yeah, well, I mean,
let's go ahead. Yeah, let's go back to the paint picture.
Okay, you want to go back to the picture? Sure, let's do that. Okay. So I'll reshare that. So this is the reason why I went through this exercise, and maybe it seems like kind of an arduous exercise, but the reason why I went through it is because I want to make sure that we are not at cross purposes here, that when we're talking about race, we both know exactly what we're talking about when we talk about race. There's races, which are broad categories, and then there are ethnicities. Or maybe a better way to describe it is to go from the ground up. Ethnicities are discrete and distinct ethnic categories, and you yourself have admitted that they are real, what you would call real categories. That is, they're based on reality. To me, a race is just a collection of ethnicities that for one reason or another, you take an ethnicity and you put it in one bucket or another bucket, and those buckets are the races: the white race, the black race, the yellow race, the red race, the Aboriginal race.
Okay.
So now I want to go back to the question that you asked, and you said, well, what predictive thing can you tell me? What predictive thing can you tell me about the people in these different categories? Because that's sort of, I think we can agree that is sort of the basis of categorical validity. A category is valid if it can help you predict something. And I would say right off the bat, what they look like. That's the most obvious thing. A racial category can help you predict what a person is going to look like. Do you disagree with that?
But that's kind of like a tautology, because knowing what they look like is something you will probably confirm when you either have them in front of you or you have visual evidence of how they look like. So you're already getting how they look like. That's not exactly a prediction.
No, like, that's not necessarily true at all. Look, if I told you, I have a roommate. If I told you that my roommate is white, now you've never seen this guy, so you don't know what he looks like. But I just told you that he's white, that he's a member of the white race. Does that give you any idea, any prediction about what he'll look like?
Well, let's state this negatively. It narrows down the scope of my imagination a bit, but it doesn't give me actually anything solid, especially with how we formulated the white column in this paint. But yeah, to be actually very honest, it will narrow down my speculation a bit, but it will largely be a bogus, blurry image.
Okay, but I can agree with blurry, but not with bogus, because many categories, which I almost said most people, but I remembered our deal of not appealing to popularity. Many categories, which I personally would consider valid, will narrow down my image, but they will still leave me very blurry. So let's say I have a friend, and my friend says, I just got a new pet. And I say, oh, what sort of pet did you get? And they say, it's a bird. Now, knowing that it's a bird, that puts it in a category, and that really narrows down for me what it might look like. But the range of things that it might look like is still so broad that it's still blurry. Now, does that mean that bird is an invalid category?
No, but here's the thing. We're not debating exactly the validity here. We're debating the prediction power. And the thing is that the category black, the predictive result cannot be black because that's kind of already the title of the category. Like, I understand that you can tell your friend Joe is black, and your friend will have now a narrowed down subset of appearances that he will be thinking of. But with like leaving that interaction aside, the definition itself has to have the predictive power on its own. And in the category black, black is not the prediction. Black is the premise. In the category yellow, yellow is not the prediction. It's the premise. It's the beginning. It's how you start it. Like, you observe yellow people. Good. What's the prediction now? Because yellow is just the observation. It's the premise. So I'm with you. If I tell you black, it's going to be somebody definitely looking more like Obama than Bush. But that doesn't give predictive power to the category. The predictive power comes after that. Okay, we've established that that person looks black, but what's the prediction? Because you already... Yeah, okay, sorry.
I think that's good. So my answer to that is, you're right. If somebody tells me, look, my friend who you're going to meet later on today is a black man, then I'm going to know from the word black that their skin is darker than mine, right? Because that's inherent in the word. I know that black is darker than white, and you know, so it makes sense that I would know it from the word. I can predict other things about how he's going to look, and I will have a pretty, you know, strong likelihood that my predictions will be correct. I can predict that his nose will probably be broader than mine, or that his lower mandible will be larger than mine, most likely. Or that his teeth are probably going to be whiter than mine. Now, a prediction doesn't have to be 100% correct all of the time in order to be valid. It just has to be probable, and we could define probability by a lot of...
It doesn't have to be just probable. It has to be probable within a usable range. Like me getting rained down by a meteorite right now, it's probable. It's just not very probable at all.
Well, okay, this is a semantic point, but I'll address it. When I say the word...
Wait, let me explain that point a little bit better, because it's not semantic. I don't want us to go to the semantic side.
Okay, go ahead.
Quantifying what we understand, it's crucial in all our endeavors, in engineering, in law. Quantifying things is very important. And when I will try, I will try strongly to leave science out of this. But when an investor approaches you, okay, and they want to invest money in your company so that they make more money for themselves, okay, yeah, the growth of your company is probable, but they don't care about that. They care about this narrow range of probability that makes it profitable for them to invest in your company. So even in common day items outside science, the strength of the probability is that what matters, not the probability itself. Because, based on simple probability, you still don't get any actionable information. You need specific levels of probability to start approaching actionable information.
Okay, so let me refine what I said before. When and going forward, just so we both understand each other, when I use the word probable, I'm using it in a colloquial sense to mean usefully probable, probable enough to be useful. Mm-hmm. So, if I ask somebody, is a meteor going to fall on my head and kill me today? If they would say probably, I would understand their meaning to be, it is likely enough that you should be scared of that. Now, they could say probably as a wise ass and mean, yes, the probability is 0.00000000001%. Yeah, exactly. But that's not what I mean. I mean it in a colloquial sense. So if somebody says to me, look, later on, we're going to go out to dinner. There's going to be a buddy of mine there. You've never met him before, but he's a great guy. He's a black gentleman. I'm going to know that probably that is to a probability that is useful, that is going to be correct often enough that it's useful to me. Probably he has whiter teeth than I do. Probably he has a larger lower mandible than me. Probably, mandible bone. Probably he has a broader nose than I do. Probably his hair is curlier than mine. These are all things that I can predict just based on that signifier black, which does not itself tell me anything about, that is to say, it is not explicitly telling me anything, although it is implicitly telling me things, but it's not explicitly telling me anything about the curliness of this gentleman's hair. Do you agree with that?
Although I agree, I don't think we're getting ahead in the point, because again, we are very, very close, if not exclusively, on the definition of black again, not its prediction. What I mean is, when race is a controversial issue, either in science or in politics, it's not controversial because somebody says, when I think about black people, dark hair comes to mind. That's not the contestable part. That's not a contestable prediction.
Why isn't that a contestable prediction? I could contest that. I could say, that's wrong.
When Antifa, what I mean is, when Antifa protest a race realist lecture or whatever, they're not protesting the fact that somebody's saying black people have darker hair. Okay, so I really want us to move into kind of like socially meaningful predictions. Like I've already conceded to you that in a social context where people look different, referring to them by looks can be useful. I already conceded that, and I said that doesn't make it necessarily biological reality or not. It's just necessarily it's just useful socially. So
okay,
I understand your point. When somebody tells you a black gentleman, you get a good idea about the hair and the stuff. But I want us to go into the juicy predictions, like, because these are still definitional. I mean, black is kind of it kind of already connotates some severe lack of blonde hair. Okay.
So I want to indulge you. I want to take this conversation in whatever direction you want to go. But before we do, I have a couple of follow-up questions that I basically have to ask.
Good.
I really have 3 questions. So my first question is this. Do you agree with me? Well, you just said that you agreed with me on that. But so then I would say, do you agree with me that the color of somebody's hair is itself a biological feature?
Well, to the degree, I will just put some reasonable caveats. To the degree that they're not chemically tampering with their hair, to the degree,
yeah, of course, sure. So
to the degree that they're not
natural
walking,
color, the natural color of their hair. Okay.
Again, that's a good. I won't segue there. I will just make this notice. That's why these topics are complicated, because if we go into how genotype transforms to phenotype, it's not as simple as people think to end up with black hair or blonde hair. But let's move on. Let's not segue there. I'll just say this: as long as nothing is artificially tampered, yes, that's what you see is what you get. Yes.
Do you agree with me that ethnicities are biological concepts? That ethnicity is a biological concept, not just a social concept.
Ethnicity is, let me find the good word. It's an ecological concept. Ethnicity describes a group of people who they have had reproductive sex most with over time, but also their cultural progress over time. And by progress, I don't mean just ahead. I mean just the stages of their culture, okay? Because cultures can, you know, track back easily. So yes, ethnicity is partly a biological category in the sense that it contains a lot of valuable biological information to the degree that it's often used in pharmaceutical or biological research on humans. But it's not exclusively biological. It includes all the metaphenomenon of the social animal we call humans. That's why I call it an ecological concept, because it's not in vitro, it's not organisms inside the lab, it's organisms in their free and natural behavior in the environment itself. Now, the important thing about that is that this environmental factor, this culture, sorry, not environmental, this non-biological factor, culture, is what keeps the group together, not the genetics. Because mainly language and familial love is what starts a tribe from a set of families and grows that into an ethnicity. So that doesn't nullify the biological contribution. Of course, ethnicities are good biological predictors, but it offers a level of nuance we have to understand when approaching humans, that when we talk about subspecies of animals, those subspecies occur because of genetics and because of landmarks and features of the terrain. Okay, so if scientists say that two, and I want to appeal to the authority now, I'm just drawing the example. If scientists say that two different subspecies of the same species of wolf are different, that's not because of the culture of the wolves. Some genetic difference make their mating harder between them, and some distance and way of hunting or stuff that has to do with the landscape changes between them. But in humans, while ethnicities do have biological differences, the reason they stick together is not the natural phenomena on animals, the subspeciation. What keeps them together is culture, language.
So this is not what the answer that I expected you to give me, but it's very interesting, and I kind of have to break. I kind of have to break a promise here. Not really a promise, but I'm turning myself into a liar, because I told you that I would have 3 questions for you. And the answers to the first 2 questions I thought were sort of slam dunk answers. I thought that you would give me very specific answers. And now I'm going to be a really ungracious host and pursue you on this point. But I want you to know that I haven't forgotten what you said about getting to the juicier stuff. So please don't think that I'm trying to like sidestep that. It's just that I find this really, really fascinating.
I'm not in a hurry.
Do you think that there's something special about the human species that makes us not prone to subspeciation?
Yes, exactly what I described right now. That we don't stick together based on genitalia compatibility or based on vagina lubrication. We don't stick together based on coordinations of mating cycles and accessibility of food. We stick together based on the culture and language, no matter what else, and we fix the other problems that arise from the environment through our culture and language.
So this is a sort of human exceptionalism, right? We are the only species, in your opinion, on the entire planet of whom this is true?
Yes, that's my nickname, dude. That's my username.
OneSpecies. Okay, great. Well, I'm sorry.
If vegans ever accuse me that I'm a speciesist, yes, I am a speciesist.
Well, I mean, I think
believe
this is
in the exceptionalism of humans.
All right. So then my only other question is: do you think that there's no animal, that is to say, non-human animal, that has culture? Do you think culture is a strictly human phenomenon?
they can have elements of social behavior that can even reach the level of teachable skills, like young wolves will get taught how to hunt, or young chimps will get taught how to fish out the ants from within the nest with a straw, with a tree branch. So they've reached the level of passing down skills, but they're not accumulating civilization. So my answer to you is, they present elements of social behavior that could lead even to subcultural phenomena, but they do not accumulate civilization.
So is that a no? So then no
Yes.
animal other than humans have culture, what you would call culture.
Yes, because for me, culture is always related to civilization. So I will have to deny that animals have culture.
Well, I mean, listen, I don't want to derail us from the juicy stuff, and we can get to the juicy stuff.
No, I'm with you. Go on.
I think that you and we've basically just hit on the number one fundamental difference between your outlook and mine. Because I'm really a pure biological determinist. That is to say, I think that even culture itself is genetic. That the things that the clothing that we wear, our propensity to speak in a certain way, or to speak a certain language, the reason why some languages are some ways and others are other ways, in other words, the systems of government that we create, the courtship rituals that we entertain, all of these things, to me, that you and I think would both call culture, to me, the root cause, the prime motivator of all of these things is our genetic makeup. And to me, animals have culture. They just don't have culture that's as intricate or as complicated as ours, but in the same sense that the things that they do, the social interactions that they have, vary from group to group, and in my opinion, are primarily motivated by their genes. They also have some sort of culture. Now, associating culture strictly with civilization, that is
I'm old school. If an archaeologist can't find it, no matter what, it's not a culture. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. And that's sort of a semantic point. I don't want to get hung up on that semantic point. But to me, this is the big difference. I mean, this is it right here. We've really just cracked it. And I think it's probably the difference between you and...
It's no surprise for me. I know that you think you are a biological determinist from the general, from the general views you have on this topic. And I know that, without playing any semantic games, I'm not a biological determinist. But if you allow me to overreach with the words a bit to make a good argument, I would make the argument that I'm more of a biological determinist than you in the following manner. Biology itself has a whole subset of things that it doesn't touch. It leaves them fluid. It leaves them to the critical skills of the organism. It leaves them to play out live in life. It doesn't code for them. So, okay, you're a biological determinist. The trick there is that biology itself limits itself to the stuff that it's good, and for the rest, it has created tissues like brain and eyes, like interactive tissues that can take information. So we could go with your theory that, look, I mean, it's the JF theory too, like environment and culture, they come from humans, and humans come from DNA, so it's all genetic. Okay, the voice aside, that's roughly the argument, isn't it?
Yes, that's the argument. That was a great impression.
I appreciate it.
I thought for a moment, I thought that JF had joined the stream. I was really flattered, and then I realized it was just you, and I was very disappointed.
Hit me on the super chat. The thing is, though, that if we take that approach, we run into a huge problem. Biology itself has decided that some things are just not coded for. Like, for example, the structure of your neurons will be coded for, but what you will use your neurons for is not coded for, because biology would not be good at that. Programmers run into that shit very early in the programming endeavor. They were trying to program machines to do shit by scripting commands. And what they run into was the collapse and definition crisis in the programming industry, which meant that, okay, you type to the computer, lift the chair. But then what is a chair? So you have to code in 90,000 lines that describe every possible kind of chair. And then you run into the limitation that with the 80s and 90s chips, you didn't have enough memory to run all those commands. So fuck it, it doesn't work. So what did they realize? They realized that hardware determinism itself suggests that not everything is determined by the hardware. So they realized that, okay, the hardware is a good idea, but the software has to be able to learn, because you can't code for everything. So they made what we call now AI, or machine learning, or artificial intelligence. Why did they make that? Because simply coding stuff ahead of time without the specific interaction, definitions, meaning, and environment is either too inefficient or useless completely. So nature doesn't have the luxury of inefficiency, because all resources are finite, the days are finite, the life of an animal is finite. So evolution thrives on efficiency. Efficient things survive. Now, part of the efficiency of biology was that it's coding for the things that it's very good at, like your heart, your arteries, your glands, your eyes. They are very biologically determined, because, you know, biology is good at that shit. But what you will see with your eyes and how you categorize it is not coded for, because it wouldn't help you survive. It would end up in an infinite regression of useless lines of commands. That's the interactive part.
I love the analogy. I think it's great. I think it's beautiful. And I will make this concession. The world that we live on is not something that was determined by our genes. It's only something that our genes could react to. And so maybe, given the exact same genetic makeup that we have, if we were deposited on a planet where, you know, that just didn't look like our planet, that didn't have trees and rocks and oceans and the same gravity or whatever, we might have developed into something very, very different than what we are, culturally as well as, you know, phenotypically or whatever. And so I in that respect, I do think that there is a sort of chaos element to who we are, that it's not, that I'm not a strict biological determinist just in that respect. But I would say, setting aside what we might see with our eyes, which, yes, we're not programmed for what it is that we're going to see, the ensemble of possible reactions or interpretations that we could have to the entire universe of things that we possibly could see, that I would say is genetic. Now, this is I do want to put a pin in this, though, because here's why. We've been talking for about 2 hours. I don't want this I don't want this to go on forever and ever and ever. It's felt like nothing, because you're such an interesting conversationalist, and I've really enjoyed that. But you said that you wanted to get to the juicy bits. I had a sort of a juicy bit that I wanted to throw at you too. So let's transition to that quickly and see if we can do it. Do you think we might be able to do it in the next 30 minutes?
Yeah. I mean, what's your most generous time limitation? I'm not too limited, by the way. So what's your most generous time?
It's, you know, I'm not too limited. I have a hard stop of 6 p.m. There's no way I can go past that. That's a long time from now.
Can you? Okay. Can you give me that in minutes duration? Because
oh yeah, sure, of course, because we're in different. So I could theoretically go for another 2 hours. I really don't want to.
Okay,
I really don't want
that's a really hard stop. Good.
Yeah,
Let's
but
go with that.
I'm not trying to be. I'm not trying to put too fine a point on this. I don't want to go for another 2 hours.
Yeah.
I like you a lot, and I like talking to you, but I just don't want to talk that long.
Great. Okay, let's attempt to go into the juicy stuff, and we'll see if we can ever go back to where we left it.
Okay.
Now, for me, what's the juicy stuff? Okay, here are a few examples. Okay. Now, let me make a little caveat here. I won't call on the authority of scientists. I will just make an example. Like when scientists have something in the data that upsets them, and they think it's a social necessity to be known, okay, they kind of do it. Like they did it with heart disease, although it turns out some of their conclusions may have been slightly wrong over the years, but they did it with heart disease, they did it with smoking, they did it with climate change. So whenever, let's say, the scientists that deal most with the topic find problems in the topic, they do publicize the problems. They do come with grievances in society. Can we accept that has happened?
Sure.
Okay, good. Now, when I have to analyze the proposal of racialism, I kind of have to rely on what racialist advocates say, not what scientists say, because A, I can't find many scientists that advocate for race, and B, the ones that I can find are talking about something completely different than you and the average Joe. So, I mean, it's actually convenient for us. We don't want to go into the peer review again. We're gonna stay on the simple social average fella. But I'm just outlining here that what you will hear is based on what racialism advocates themselves say. I'm not taking any kind of like, I don't know, scientific authority on what's racism. I'm going to take what people think it offers them. Okay, is that a fair deal?
It's a fair deal as long as we do this. Can we limit this to things that I would be likely to encounter? Because I do not want to be put in the position of having to defend assertions that I myself would never make or that I don't even believe. So
no, I won't throw them on you necessarily, but if I propose something you don't exactly believe, but you understand is very popular and you want to address it, cool. If you want to skip it, cool again. I'll just try to navigate, okay?
Sure.
Okay, so one thing is, for example, let's take the school of Molyneux for a while, okay? He's not within the argument from authority. He's a guy that has been vocal for the recent years. He's been saying like open borders, libertarianism, crash the government. But then he said, look, guys, I saw the evidence and I think there are races and I think they can predict this and that. Okay, can we go with this guy's example for a while? I mean, is Molyneux's racialism or race realism close enough to your brand, you would think?
I'll be honest with you. I'm not subscribed to Molyneux, and I think I've maybe watched one of his videos. But let's do it. Let's talk about it.
Okay,
we can talk about it. I can't tell you anything about it.
Yeah, I will try to draw simple specifics as I talk, so you won't be in the dark. Trust me. So, for example, Molyneux presents several slides in his lectures where he presents, for example, European Americans like a shift towards the right, like a shift towards conservatives. Then Latino Americans, a shift towards the Democrats, big shift towards the Democrats. African Americans, big shift towards the Democrats. So he makes the argument, look, here's the data. Here are three distinct categories that we see behave differently. A, this is valuable data. B, if we ignore this, we are having factors that are screwing up our political process without even understanding. Okay? So far, so good. I mean, is there something you completely disagree so far?
Well, I don't know about disagree because I don't, like I said, I don't really watch Molyneux, but I understand
No.
everything that
The
you're saying.
audience will know if I'm fair to Molyneux or not. All I'm saying is, did I say anything that would have you on the edge of your seat? Like, did I say anything completely stupid? Does that reflect the situation on the floor a bit? Are we moving on? I think we're moving on.
Yeah, let's just get it all out, man. Get it all out.
Okay.
So
So Molyneux makes that observation. Okay.
okay, sure.
Now, since Molyneux is not sporting swastikas and he's not beating up immigrants on the street, he affords me, he affords me the opportunity to approach this intellectually and say, okay, this guy said this. Let's see if it works. Okay. Now, the problem is, I would say, okay, here, Mr. Molyneux, these are some broad cultural categories in America. And indeed, they seem to have these voting correlations. Good. The problem starts when you say these categories are biological, and not only that, that other people from these biological categories in other places and cultures in the world will behave the same, or kind of like within the same range. Why is that a problem? Because if you go to Europe, which is exactly the same planet with America, like exactly the same planet. If you go to Europe, it's the whites that want big government. Okay, it's the whites that have these socialist dreams. It's the whites that want wealth redistribution to the max. So much so that when American news are reported in Europe, the only version of news we get is the CNN or MSNBC version. We only get the Democrat version of news in Europe. Like everyone in Europe, I mean, at least from the political classes, considers anything apart from the Democrats in America intolerable. They won't even transmit the version of news Fox transmits. So clearly, biologically, there is nothing that pushes European whites away from big government. So, like, okay, Molyneux made this slide, he put the numbers there, and it seems there's roughly some categories, but once you claim these categories are biological, they crash. Because Germans love big government. They love high taxes. They fucking love it. Why? Because it works in their country. But it doesn't matter. The biological prediction didn't match an 80 million people consistent population. So it's far off the biology, clearly. But if we employ cultural understanding, we will see that America started by American settlers initially were mostly English and German disaffected Europeans who had reasons to distrust government. They had reasons to want small government. Plus, when they arrived in America, there were no roads, there were no sewage systems and public utilities. So what would you pay taxes for? I mean, and also, if you look into it, the taxes in America were ridiculously low for the first 100 or 150 years. Because actually, yeah, there wasn't much service you would pay taxes for. So if you approach this from the cultural interpretation, you can instantly come up with facts, observe the facts, come up with hypotheses, and put them to a logical test on the spot. Not even science needed. You can put the historical facts on the spot and like start making arguments about them, and verifiable arguments too. But if you pin it on biology, then it crashes, because Canadians are more pro-government, pro-big government than the Latinos in America. So biologically, the Molyneux dogma just crashed. And if I am to accept the predictive power of something, I want it to have a predictive power, because I believe that our choices make the difference between life and death. And running on bad assumptions is not my thing.
Well, nothing that you said.
That's why we. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. Nothing that you said challenged. I mean, look. First of all, I don't know if this was your purpose, if this is what you were trying to do. So I want to say what you said was very well said, and it made a lot of sense in a lot of ways. But nothing about it challenged my fundamentally biologically determinist, or as you said earlier, racialist viewpoint of the world. In fact, the conditions that you described, with the exception of the last thing that you said about Canadians, which I just think is factually untrue, I might be wrong, but the conditions that you described at any rate were exactly what I, as a biological determinist, would expect to have happened. The world vision that you laid out is the world that I would expect to exist as a biological determinist.
What we need to do now is, one, put that paint thing back on screen, and you need to start noting your own predictions based on race. And two, you need, while you do that, you need to explain to me how is the difference between Germans and Texan Germans in financial and fiscal issues. How is the difference biologically underpinned?
Yeah, well, I'll do it in reverse order. So yeah, the biological difference is really, really, really easy to explain. There was a biological, an evolutionary phenomenon. The phenomenon took place starting from the discovery of the New World, and I would argue continues to take place up to this day. And that phenomenon was of a selective migration, a self-selective migration of certain kinds of white people of a certain biological disposition, from Europe to the New World. And there's a gradient of, there's sort of like a pressure gradient from the discovery of the New World up to today. But I still think that this phenomenon is ongoing. But let's start with the discovery of the New World, and go from there. The New World is discovered by Chris Columbus and his pals. I know there's some argument about whether or not Christopher Columbus.
Yeah. Let's not go into that.
Okay, and your way of surviving, if you come here to live, is literally you have to hew your life out of nature. You have to, cut down the trees and build the house and shoot the deer and plant the farm. You have to start from the ground up because there really isn't any kind of infrastructure in this new world. There's a native population here, but they're living in tents and they're nomadic, and some of them don't even have written language. They haven't even invented the wheel. Okay? What kind of a German, what kind of an Englishman, what kind of a Frenchman is going to say, you know what? This civilization thing that we have going on here, I'm going to leave this, and I'm going to go across the ocean where that in and of itself is a peril. I might drown, right? My boat might capsize. And then when I get there, I might get, scalped by...
Give me a second here. Give me a second here, because I have to point something out. I have a lot of things to say about what you've been saying right now, but I don't want to interrupt. But for one thing, I have to interrupt you. Your hypothetical, although it sounds very reasonable, it is not that predictive. Because, for example, right now we're having refugees, okay? Well, what sort of refugee would leave their countries? And don't get me wrong, let's call them immigrants. Because refugees may have bombs on their heads going off, so they might have an extra incentive. Let's go with regular financial immigrants. They obviously risk death. They risk this and they risk that. Okay. Does that give us any prediction on what part of society from that country is coming over here? Yeah, not much. If you know their ethnicity and whether they're religious or not, which are cultural indicators, you can extract a lot more prediction about how they would behave in a Western democracy background. rather than if you assume that there's some sort of selection taking place when they leave the place. Because when you leave, dude, you might leave out of despair. Like, there've been 3 waves of Greek migration outwards, and all 3 were fueled by despair. Okay, people didn't have actually any clue what was waiting for them outside after they went out of that ship. All they knew was that they had enough here. Okay, so okay, I can go with your example, but don't base everything on that, because it's not gonna go well.
Well, no, I mean, I can address that right now. I would say whether you're leaving because you're thrill-seeking, whether you're leaving out of despair, whether you're leaving because you're being persecuted where you are and the people there don't want you to stick around anymore. These are all, in my opinion, genetic reasons. If you're a thrill seeker, that's something genetic. If you're desperate, again, you could disagree, but I'm just laying out my perspective here.
Yeah, but we have to make some sense. Like, for example, in Anatolia, there was a big Greek community that lived there, and they were merchants, they were capitalists, like before even capitalism was cool, and they were meritocratic and patriarchal, okay? But some stupid Greek diplomacy and army handlings had the Neo-Turk movement on their asses, and Kemal Ataturk basically chased them into the sea with the intent of offing them completely. Anyway, 1.5 million of them or something like that survived, and they came over back to mainland Greece. Now, these people were strictly Western-facing, market-facing, capitalist appreciating, patriarchal, mercantile, if you want. Now, when they arrived here, the locals thought, oh my God, the men, look at them, they shave. What, are they gay or something? And like the women, they're too clean. There's no mud on their skirts. What are they, whores? Are they prostitutes? So the local villager Greeks were royalists and right-wing, but they didn't necessarily understand anything about the Enlightenment or capitalism or anything. They were just farmers. So they thought these new arrivals of Greeks are looking funny, okay? So they made their life hell for 30, 40 years. Within those 30, 40 years, all those Anatolian Greeks that were capitalist, market-facing, blah, 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 became hardcore communist unionizers to the extreme, okay? They became the backbone of the Greek Communist Party. They were the stronger authors of the Greek communist authorship. And all that happened within 20 or 30 years. Not only did they have no chance to adapt genetically, they did not know they would face that circumstance on arrival. They did not make the choice when they were leaving the port. They just left the port because behind them there was a huge fire burning the city. So how can them switching to communist within 20 years be a genetic switch or a genetic filter or anything of that sort?
I think it's entirely conceivable that a genetic phenotype presents as a cutthroat free market capitalist in one set of circumstances and a totalitarian Marxist in another set of circumstances. In fact, I can think of an ethnic group who is famous for that. There's a certain ethnic group who are really, really famous for sort of dominating two extremes, extreme ends of the sort of libertarian Marxist spectrum, and presenting, or providing both supplying, I think is the word I'm looking for, both the most extreme Milton Friedman, Peter Schiff type libertarians and the most extreme Karl Radek, Leon Trotsky type Marxists. And you know what that ethnic group
I
is.
know, man. I know. I'm too old in this world to not know what the suggestion is here. But please do go on.
So it's, to me, not only is it conceivable that there is such a phenotype that exists that flips from one very extreme survival strategy to another, but I actually know that such a phenotype already exists. So nothing that you're saying challenges my idea that we are fundamentally biological creatures.
Could we then look, fundamentally we are biological, because if you remove my body, I don't exist. But that doesn't say...
There you go. You're making my argument for me.
No. I'm making clear how your argument fails reality, because it's a tautology. Yes, carbon-based biological organisms have a lot to do with biology, because guess what? If you remove the body, the organism is not there anymore.
Yeah, and what I'm saying,
Wait, please wait.
Sure, go ahead.
Please wait.
Go ahead.
But what we're discussing here is whether certain behaviors or certain ranges of behaviors or certain disparities of behaviors are coded or not. Basically, that's what we're discussing. Because, yeah, your argument that everything is biology, we kind of considered that we won't go with that approach. We're going with a little bit more reasonable approach, which says, yes, there is environmental factors. And the thing is, I described to you earlier that biology itself recognizes that a huge amount of factors need to be interactive, and it doesn't code for it. So, in what sense? So, anyway, this was my observation, let's say. But let's take your narrative, let's take your approach to biological determinism and try to find groups with the exact same phenotype you described. Can we?
Well, I mean, I found one, and you gave me another, so that's two. Why don't you let me?
I didn't give you another. Which group did I give you?
You gave me these like specific Anatolian
Greeks. Yes, but I wasn't making that argument. I'm about to give you some groups. Can I offer you some groups?
I would love it. Sure.
Okay, good. Americans, the day of the New Deal, the day the New Deal started, okay? They didn't believe at all in that shit. Like, before, you could actually argue that before when was it? 29, the crash? The big crash?
Yes, you mean, Black Friday. That happened in 1929, yes.
Could you argue that America was a lot more libertarian and a lot more financially right-wing before that crash?
Yeah.
Okay. Could we argue or observe that after a few years of the New Deal, a new belief arose among the people, belief in the government money tree, and that belief influenced things in so radical ways that the Democrats had to swap half of their voters with the Republicans and vice versa in a process that lasted 50 years. Okay. Can we say that if you say that there is this Jewish phenotype that can flip between the two ends, and there's this Anatolian Greek phenotype that can flip between these two ends, can we say that this phenotype was largely represented in white Americans? Because with a couple of years or more of the New Deal, a lot of them flipped. And I mean, a lot of them, man.
I mean, I think that you can, to the extent that you can say, look, this adaptability is clearly... it's clearly a feature of any ethnic group or race that you care to define, because what you're describing, a sort of spectrum, of economic strategy, a spectrum of social strategy, because that's really what economic strategy is. It's just social strategy, exists in every single ethnic group on the planet. Germans, you know, in the GDR were
Yes, but then
well, wait a second. Why don't you let me? So you asked the
on.
question, so now let me answer. So I'd say Germans in the GDR had a much more sort of left-wing economic or social strategy than those same exact people's descendants, or some of them the same people, do in unified Germany today. But what I would say is that you could set these spectra, right? You can set them up next to each other and see that they don't really overlap for all groups. That, for example, for the group that you described, it really clusters. Those people really cluster at the extremes. I'm just going by your description. You said, well, when they first got back to Greece, they were really hardcore laissez-faire capitalist libertarians, and then they flipped to like hardcore Marxist Stalinists, right? Okay, sure. For some people, it's clusters in the middle, right? For some people, it's much more moderate. I would say the big difference between Americans and Europeans is that, yes, and Americans is really not a genetic category. So we should also be careful there when we talk about it, but it's not even an ethnic category. But let's say white Americans versus Europeans. There we go. Yes, there's a big difference between the white America of 1925, the Roaring 20s, where, you know, anything goes sort of economically and the business of government is business, and the white America of 1935, where suddenly FDR-style New Deal socialism doesn't look that bad. There's a spectrum there, but that spectrum is way to the right of the spectrum of white Europeans, because even in, you know, New Deal 1935 era, most Americans would have said, if FDR said, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take away your guns. They would have said, what the heck are you talking about, right? Whereas Europeans, or, you know, the rump of Europe that was left behind when really the best and brightest of its genetic stock was extracted out of Europe into the New World, those people are so docile that they're happy to give their guns away. And many European countries it's extremely difficult for an ordinary person to get a gun. Those people are so docile that they are living today in an economic situation that is more socialist than the height of the New Deal, than the most New Dealiest part of the New Deal, right? So yeah, those spectra exist for both of us, but they don't perfectly overlap. They are predictive.
Okay, they are predictive. Now, I want to respond exactly to that. You gave me a nice response. It gives me room to respond, but I need a minute of the mic. And maybe it's a good idea you put those categories back on screen while I come back and respond to what you just said, okay?
So here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I'm going to do, because this has been a really nice long conversation. It's been really great, but I am going to put a pin in this because we've been talking now for...
Okay, then I just have to respond to the last thing you said then.
Well, what I'm going to do, let me finish here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the final word. So I want you to respond to the last thing that I said, and then you can say whatever else you want to say, and we're going to end it on that. And what I would like to do is invite you to do this again with me sometime, because I've enjoyed this so much, and I feel like there's still a lot that we have left to explore. Could we like wrap it up?
Yeah, we could rearrange. Let me have the closing statement then regarding just what you said, not the whole conversation. I will just talk about what you said. So here's the problem. You just described the perfect way to reduce our predictive power by binding things to biology. And you just demonstrated that perfectly. Like, you literally can rewind and hear yourself reduce our predictive power. Because if we assume that this ability to variate between political spectrums is inherent in every group, that's not a prediction, though, because it doesn't differentiate between the groups. It doesn't add information. It removes information from the equation. It removes one feature. But if you go by culture, then you can understand that the Anatolian Greeks had to become radical communists on the edge instead of something more centrist, perhaps, because that was the only thing literally happening in the Balkans apart from ethno-royalist farmers. The only other thing in the Balkans in the 20s, apart from royalist people and right-wing people, was literally communists. There was nothing else, so they had to join someone. So culture can give you a very simple response that doesn't tie your hands. And if we take the same culture approach to America, we can realize that those few years that passed between Americans Europeans settling America and their current behaviors, they're not enough to filter everything, nor their trip in the beginning was enough to filter the behaviors we're having. But biology codes for humans to have intellect, and their intellect drives them to do what's more appropriate under the conditions. And that's how culturally you can have Texan Germans that are, pro-small government in huge numbers, and Berlin Germans that can have huge government like as a favorite, but with predictive power as well. Because if you bind it to biology, then you have to regress to the position that probably everybody has this feature. While if you specify it through culture and say that Germans that faced persecution and arrived in a land that had no infrastructure culturally formed this small government culture, that makes perfect sense. It is predictive, and it doesn't stop you from either other biological or other cultural predictions. But what you did there to assume that, okay, some phenotypes might verge on the extremes, but generally most groups have this ability to switch a position, okay? Once you make that assumption, you reduce predictive power. That's it.
Okay, I really want to respond to everything that you just said, but I'm going to stick to my commitment of giving you the last word on that. And it's good because it means that we could come back if you want to, and if you don't want to, that's understandable too. But if you'd like to come back to this conversation at some point in the future, I would be happy to.
Yeah, we could reschedule. We could reschedule.
Yeah, or just, I don't know about reschedule, because this, we did this. This worked. We talked.
Yeah, no, we could schedule further meetings depending on our time. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. OneSpecies, you've been a very gracious guest. I've really enjoyed talking to you. There are a lot of things that we weren't able to get into that I would still like to. But in the meantime, where can people check you out? Where can people find you?
Well, you could link my channel.
Already, I'm way ahead of you there, so I've got those links down there.
OneSpecies on YouTube and OneSpecies Real, I think, on Twitter. Let me check. Yes, and that's it.
Okay, great.
And I'll be coming back with new videos soon, because people might look at my channel and it looks quite quiet right now.
Oh, dude, yeah, I feel you there. I'm like that too. I'm a full-time engineering student. I really don't have time to do full-time YouTube or anything like that. I think that's a lot of people. That's kind of the beauty of YouTube, or what it was supposed to be, is that is just like an all-access thing for people of varying levels of skill, varying abilities to commit time to just sort of jump in and take part in this great big conversation.
Happened. The algorithm, boo.
Right. All right, OneSpecies. I'm gonna wrap it up there.
Okay,
very interesting conversation, and hopefully we can schedule something. Thank you for coming. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.